Hey, Dominic.
Hey, Jenna.
Well, this has been one hell of a week. It looks like legacy media took a bit of a hit, at least when it comes to public trust. And just when you thought the trust in cable news couldn't get any lower.
I know. There's that whole bombshell book that rocked the world of journalism this week.
Yeah, it's something to talk about. But, well, listen, we're going to get into it. So let's start the show. Hi, I'm Jenna.
And I'm Dom. You know what's funny? Not long ago, we were both breaking news. Now we're
Breaking unemployment records.
exactly just like thousands of other journalists who've been laid off from newsrooms across the country.
Yeah, and after the shock wore off, we kept asking ourselves, what the hell do we do now?
And over many, many cups of coffee,
And maybe a few drinks.
we realized we had a unique opportunity here. Why not pull back the curtain on what's really happening in American media?
Right? I mean, we've spent years in this industry seeing how stories get made or don't, and now we can actually talk about it.
And trust me, there's a lot to talk about. From local news disappearing to social media reshaping journalism, we'll break it all down.
And look, we're not here to lecture anybody. We just want to help make sense of the information that we're getting and maybe have some much needed fun along the way.
So whether you're glued to the news, just trying to figure out what's real in your feed, or curious about the future of media, come hang with us.
Welcome to Laid Off and Looking, a podcast where two journalists
Are taking a critical look at American media. Yeah, so it's been a rough week for Jake Tapper, and that's where we're kicking things off with this week, Jenna. Um, I know. The CNN anchor has been facing lots of backlash over his new book, Original Sin, which he co-wrote with Alex Thompson from Axios. Um, the book describes former President Joe Biden's physical and mental decline, his decision to run for office again anyway in 24, and the tight circle of advisors who helped kind of cover up the issues that were dealing with the president at the time. And so the book kind of paints Biden as mostly sidelined with a small group of insiders nicknamed the Politburo who were really running the show. Um, they controlled access to the president of the then president, brushed off concerns about what he was dealing with in terms of his health, and kind of kept a lot of the party leaders in the dark. At least that's what this book is alleging. It also
hmm
claims that the White House went after reporters who asked tough questions about Biden's health. They got labeled biased, ageist, unprofessional, and it worked. A lot of journalists backed off of the whole thing. Then just days before the book dropped this week, Biden's team announced that he has stage 4 prostate cancer, which
Yeah, that
that
dropped literally right before the book dropped.
and now that's yes, and that's not in the book. And to be clear, there's no medical diagnosis of dementia or any other kind of mental
Yeah.
capacity thing that's going on. These are all things that they've talked about with other people, other sources about how the president was dealing during his 4 years, and actually even before he got into office. So really, for us, we had been talking about this, and we were saying, discussing about, the reaction to the book, and to
It's
more
been
importantly
rough.
for Jake Tapper, it's like people are really angry. They're angry at Jake Tapper for what some people, there are those who have been talking about this issue beforehand, right? The ones who have been saying that there's something off with Biden, mostly on the right, who
Yeah, I was gonna
think
be like, it felt very partisan.
it was.
In all fairness, it did feel incredibly partisan when people were bringing this up before.
And so, you have the people on the right who are like, finally, you see where our opinions are validated. And then you have people who are more Democrats, and on the left, people saying, right now, like, wait a minute, where is this coming from? Like, we all kind of knew something was up, but like, why are you guys now, even saying this? Like, did you know? Is there, so it brings up this whole criticism of whether or not, like, is it fair, this criticism that Jake Tapper's been receiving for writing this book at this time? Is it fair that, should Jake and a lot of these other journalists who have been covering the political world, and should they be called out for not diving more into what's been
Well,
going
let's
on?
not forget. I mean, just a few weeks ago, when we were talking about the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the co-author of the book, Alex, what's Alex's last name? I just blanked on it.
Alex
Anyway,
Thompson?
Alex Thompson, yes. Remember in his speech, he pointed out that, like, as legacy, at least political Washington journalists, there's stuff that we dropped the ball on and we need to do a better job. Like, he said that
Right.
in his speech. So I don't think that there's anybody who would say that, like, oh no, it's fine. There don't need to be any improvements. Of course there do. There does. My
Yes.
God, my brain is fried today. But anyway, of course there do need to be changes or improvements to the way that at least politicians, especially in Washington, get covered. And there's a lot of things, factors that would go into that, like who's going to speak on the record, because I know from my own experience reporting, even covering the state house, if you can't get somebody to go on the record, like you can't just print rumors. We're not, unless you're, I don't know, the
Well,
National Enquirer or
well,
something.
and if I'm right, I think in interviews that Tapper does say, like 99% of the book, I think he and Alex Thompson connected after the day after the election because they were like, what happened here?
Yeah.
And they said most of them that they actually got most of their information, 99% of the book of what they have in there right now only happened after the loss. And that a lot of people started talking because they didn't want to hurt the chances of the
Well,
campaign of
at the end, it was Kamala Harris's campaign because, of
correct,
course, there was
correct.
that disastrous debate that will go down in history. And that's where Joe Biden was not basically, he was forced to step down.
But but the whole thing is even talking about this while Kamala Harris is running would have still hurt her campaign too because you're the vice president, you're working with Biden. People are going to obviously then start looking at all the people around him. So I get what they're saying about how more people are going to talk once the election is over. The question then becomes though, a lot of us saw um, you know, Joe Biden not that I mean, I think that's the whole thing too. A lot of people we both look on social media and you see people talking about this. People are like we knew something was. It's not like a lot of it was very visible. People are just wondering why you writing the book now when you have somebody in office who obviously at this current point there's so many bigger things to be dealing with, right? You have in terms of you have Trump in office. People are have been questioning Trump's mental.
Oh,
You know,
for quite some time, to the
yes,
point where, like him or not, President Trump was made to submit to a mental acuity test. Now, the legitimacy of that test, you can question. The results of that test, you can question. Although we've all heard him brag several times about his very big brain. So, but at the same time, you have that dichotomy going on. And I think that was one of the things that everybody picked up on, including The Daily Show.
yes, yeah. Which right, you're like the whole. I mean, I think like when I see um Joe Biden and Trump, like even with Biden coming forward and talking about the issue of his about stage 4 prostate cancer, people wondered how did we not know about this beforehand, right? That also is a question that this it's unlikely that stage 4 means that you know
Yeah, that part I'm kind of weird about because I'm certainly, like, I've seen a lot of people play amateur oncologist online, and with the exception of a few people who purport to be doctors who have said, a fast-growing cancer is something that you do not catch earlier, you catch it at, whenever. Um, I just that part, I guess I'm just very just like, listen,
uh,
I'm not an oncologist. I'm
yeah,
not even gonna like,
yes,
oh, you
and
knew the whole time. Like, we don't know that. We don't
yes,
know what kind of medical care he was getting, what was being checked, what might have been missed. Like,
and I think for us too, certainly I don't think like what interest that is a whole separate side of the story. And I think for us, what we really connected to is just seeing holding journalism accountable and trying to understand people being as angry as they are at Jake Tapper for writing this book and where do journalists like what are they responsible for? Like and what because ultimately, like for me, I can't say that this book should not have been written. At some point in time, you knew this was going to come out, that
Oh,
people were
yeah.
going to talk about this. So I'm not here to talk about, but I do think people are raising valid issues for somebody who, now remember, back in October 2020, there was a time when Jake Tapper was actually, he had an interview with Lara Trump on CNN. And he was basically, he was called her out for a clip that had been circulating where Lara Trump,
Well, an
he
old
was
clip that
alluding,
came back up because this was from 2020. That was the thing that made the whole thing so salacious, is that this was when as far back as 2020.
and correct. And then he was, so when this clip came up, he was confronting her where he was saying that she was making fun of Joe Biden's stutter. And we have a clip of that just to give some context. We will get to hear what was said. So let's take a listen.
You made this comment earlier in the campaign about Joe Biden. Let's take a listen to that.
Every time he comes on stage or they turn to him, I'm like, Joe, can you get it out? Let's get the words out, Joe. You kind of feel bad for him.
How do you think it makes little kids with stutters feel when they see you make a comment like that?
First and foremost, I had no idea that Joe Biden ever suffered from a stutter. I think what we see on stage with Joe Biden, Jake, is very clearly a cognitive decline.
Okay.
That's what I'm referring to. It makes me uncomfortable
You have
to
no,
watch somebody on stage
that's so amazing. It's so amazing to me
and try and figure out an answer.
A cognitive decline.
Well, when you're trying to tell me that what I was suggesting was
I think that you were
stuttering,
mocking his stutter. Yeah, I think you were mocking his stutter, and I think you have absolutely no standing to diagnose somebody's cognitive decline.
So now it's interesting because I saw on that Jake Tapper, he revealed this week he was on Making Kelly's show on YouTube, and he was promoting his book, Original Sin, and he mentioned that he actually had apologized. I think within the past couple of months, he said he reached out to Lara Trump and he apologized for shutting her down on that interview back in 2020, and said, that she was about the statement she was making about Joe Biden experiencing mental decline. And so he was apologizing that she was right.
But still, there's been no diagnosis. That's my only thing, is like, so, I mean, you have a book where a lot of people have noticed, yes, this man is like, I think he would have been entering into his 80s. He's in his 80s now. He's not as sharp as he used to. I have aging parents. Dom, I know you've had aging parents. Most of us, if we're lucky enough to have been around the elderly, that happens. Um, but I'm not saying, I don't know. I feel very weird about this whole thing. Like,
It it feels weird,
what are
but
we exactly we apologizing for? There's been no diagnosis.
yes.
Except for the
And
fact that now to release a book that implies the exact same thing that Laura was implying or saying it.
that's the thing. That's the
Yeah.
thing. You write this book where you're talking about this very issue, and then all of a sudden you have to address what he knew that clip was coming back up at some point. Like it was going to circulate again once
He
this
might have
book comes out.
forgotten that clip existed.
I do not. I think they are prepared, and I think they're prepared. That's why he said, like, I think he reached out a couple of months ago to sort of cover. I mean, which I get it. You know what I mean? Like I, and I don't know. I think to me, it's really, like you said before, it's a really difficult thing to discuss in terms of having a hunch or seeing somebody over the years, how they were presenting themselves, of course, as president, being out there, having all these discussions and seeing that. I mean, you have a hunch, right? And as a reporter, I guess my thing was I was really interested in how there were not more journalists out there who were really looking into this. And there might, obviously, I think what Jake is saying is, well, people were looking into it, but they were shut down. They were shut out by
Yeah.
whether it was the Biden camp or it was the fact that there wasn't enough information to like just say what you just said, was they can't come out and say anything. You can't come out and say this person has diminished mental capacity without proof. As journalists, you can't do that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So you're kind of caught in this kind of world of like, well, then how do you address this then as a journalist? And go ahead, Jenna.
Oh, well, no, I'm just wondering, I mean, how does this help the public good? Because to me, one of the tenets at the core of journalism is always like, okay, but how does this story help the public good? And it just seems like right now there's a lot of hand wringing over what should have happened within the Democratic
Mm-hmm.
Party going into that 2024 election. Um, and I mean, is it helpful to understand what took place? Yeah, I think it is helpful to understand, but at the same time, how do we take that information now and use it going forward? For a zillion reasons, Joe Biden's not running again. So, I mean, okay, fine. Next time we have, like, does that mean that we don't let people over a certain age run for president again? Does that mean that we like force more people to be, I don't know, tested more rigorously for their
Mm-hmm.
mental acuity or something? Like, how does this help society go forward? What do we take from this and then move forward? To me, that's one of the things that like a good story should have. Like, not just that, here's where this point of tension was, but also a takeaway. And I think that's also something else that I've seen people and myself. I'm kind of just like, what exactly is the takeaway of this book other than jumping up and down on an old man?
And also, I think there's another part of this too that makes one kind of get the ick. And that is the fact of where if it seems like this does come across like watching even a lot of the reports on CNN covering their own anchor for this book is seeing a lot of people correct, like kind of, it almost feels a bit like they're promoting it. And I get that people they do promote. I've seen this done on other networks too, where sometimes, when somebody on this staff writes a book or puts out something, then all of a sudden they're promoting it. But this is a little different than writing, let's say, about a historical book. This is investigative journalism. And there is kind of a weird vibe that you get that it feels like it's like you can't write, like it's like, what are you selling here? Like it almost feels a little too commercial in a way. And you feel like, so you're selling me a story that you were downplaying. And now that you have this information, now you're probably like, well, guess what? Everybody else was right. Um, and so I think, yeah, and I know you actually had seen something recently too, correct? That was online that kind of discussed this.
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, there was Jon Stewart on The Daily Show. He pretty much
Mm-hmm.
raked CNN over the coals for the way that they handled the promotion of the book right after the news of Joe Biden's cancer diagnosis. So here's a little of what Jon Stewart had to say.
It's so hard. It's such a difficult time, so unfathomable in terms of the pain his family must be feeling. And yet, if you act now and you use the code / tap that book, you will obviously this 20% off offer is not available for some reason in Tennessee, but the point is, forgetting about the fact how weird it is that the news is selling you a book about news they should have told you was news a year ago for free.
And I just want to be clear. This is not to say that like Joe Biden's presidency is beyond criticism, because there's several things that people have pointed out. Yeah, there's time and space and effort worth criticizing him for. Some people actually want him to get better so that he can answer for things that they want to criticize him for. But this just like, I don't know, I still can't quite put my finger on, aside from what Jon Stewart said, is just like, you're selling us the news
Right.
about stuff that like, shouldn't this be a news story? Like instead of a book, like a news story? Anyway. It's just, there's something about it that feels so off and so weird and so not right.
The ick. It's just like that. It's just something you just know that feels off because you feel like this was a story that should have been almost, like you said, an investigative piece for CNN, or it could have been But here's the thing too. I think the timing, because so many of us are right now immersed in this presidency, and there's a lot going on of people being under attack and feeling like, seeing as much as going on in terms of all these different issues, and people like, wait a minute, we're going back now. Like, I understand historically, we do need to have, there's always going to be truth that comes out about, especially in terms of presidencies, things that you learned that, like, it happened with Nixon. It's happened with so many presidents, things that you find out about a presidency or a big moment in that presidency. I think, and I get it, the news cycle works so fast here that people move. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like boom, 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 boom. People do not wait anymore. But I do think that much of the public, and honestly, most people just are in a place like, why are we talking about this right now? Why at this moment? Like, don't we have bigger things to be focusing on? But to that, almost, I want to say that's really up to the public too, of what you choose to focus on. I think we're so used to all reacting to so many different things. And I'm not trying to take away from saying that news shouldn't be covered, but I also think that we as people sort of have to also be like, don't pay attention to it then. Like, don't give it don't give it the heaviness, but people, this is what happens. Media sometimes, even journalists, on cable news, it's all about the headline, getting people to watch, getting those ratings up. And CNN certainly does need to get their
ratings up. Yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
No, I completely hear what you're saying. And I also get, again, the challenges, let's say, I don't know, there's something that feels like there's journalism ethics here that are getting challenged. There's, again, that ick factor for the public. There's, how much of a story, how much of a there is there for this book. A lot of challenges. But again, it goes back to the fallout from this book and the way that the network, CNN, has handled pushing the book, or at least, promoting it, which again is understandable. If one of your anchors wrote a book, then of course you're going to see people take time to promote it. But it seems to have underscored the public's waning trust in legacy media institutions, which is pushing more and more people to want to turn to the digital space online and find people who they trust or they feel like they have a relationship with that feels more genuine there, and get news and information from them. And, we found another young journalist who is attempting to make the most of that space. So Dom and I keep coming back to this question on our show. Where are the people actually getting their news these days? Because let's face it, fewer and fewer people are picking up newspapers, turning on the evening news, or listening to the radio. The shift is incredibly dramatic, and the numbers are backing this up. In fact, the Pew Research Center recently found out that about 20% of Americans, that's 1 in 5 people, are now getting their news from digital influencers on platforms like TikTok and Instagram. These creators aren't just reporting the news, they're completely changing how we connect with what's happening in the world. So today we're talking with Shelby D. Smith. Shelby's a journalist and digital creator using social media to break down complex topics and make news more accessible, engaging, and let's face it, relevant. Here's a sample of one of her recent reports on TikTok.
If your goal for 2025 is to keep up with laws that are passed, but you don't know where to start, let me help you out. Hi, my name is Shelby. I'm a journalist covering news and politics, so follow me for more insight. There is a website called govtrack.us. The site gives you a timeline on when bills are introduced, passed in the House, passed in the Senate, and then go on to the president. If there's a certain bill that you have a strong interest in following, you can actually sign up to receive email alerts to track the progress and status of that bill. Mind you, it can take years for bills to become law, and you're not going to go to this website every single day. It's a great way to keep you afloat on things that are happening. And on the homepage of the website, they let you know which bills are trending. So these are the bills that people are finding popular, which will most likely impact a whole lot of people. And they provide the text so that you can read the bills for yourself. So if you're looking to get into politics, understanding how Congress works, how laws are passed, the process, start by going to govtrack.us. Check it out and let me know, and follow me for more information.
Shelby, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh my God, it's so great to have you on. I guess so many questions that I have, especially for the TikTok journalists, as someone who trained and came up in the more legacy media world. But you describe yourself as a Zillennial, I think is how you pronounce it. And I bring that up because I think a lot of the changes that are happening in the way that people traditionally consume media, especially news media, is very tied to generations. So how does your being a Zillennial, if I'm saying right, how does that affect the world that you consume news from?
Yeah, so Zillennial is the right pronunciation.
I
I
got it
was
right.
I was born in 1997, so I was able to grow up when social media and just technology was really advancing at a rapid pace. So that's why Zillennials get their own category, because they relate to Gen Z, but they also remember a time where, we were watching TV on news and not through TikTok, on the news, on television, and not through TikTok. So that's why we get our own little special category. But it has drastically changed. I grew up watching ABC with my parents having Sade Veteran Wall in the background. And that's really how I got introduced to news reporting information. And that's how my parents were consuming news reports and information. And then as I graduated college, high school, post grad, digital media became more and more relevant. First, it was through articles on the web, and then it was influencers taking over and just breaking down news and information, so a person didn't have to go and click into the actual link and read an entire news story. So I've seen it from television to influencers taking over within this 26-year lifespan that I've had. And yeah, that's how it's changed.
Okay, so here's one of the things that I wonder because, in my experience, again, legacy media, that a lot of people, at least stations, when they first started, or even like news outlets in general, when they first started engaging with digital media or social media, I should be very clear, it was to get people to go back to the main website. It was like, like coming up on, or, click this link here to actually read our newspaper. And while that is important, one of the things that I've learned from creators like you is that that's actually not how the platforms work. You're building a relationship with an audience in this space that might not be the same audience you have in your legacy space.
Yeah. And I think, quite frankly, Gen Z, I don't want to say can be lazy, but sometimes that can be the case where it's just like, I don't want to go back and read this information. I also think an extension of that is that Gen Z can be overworked and underpaid. So they're not really focused on getting news and information in a way that they have to study it when they're taking the train, they're commuting, they're trying to pay rent, trying to figure out how to have friendships, etc. And that's a lot. So just scrolling through TikTok and receiving that information is easiest. So I think also with Gen Z, you have influencers as talent and not necessarily news anchors. And it makes you want to consume information from them because it's relatable. It's like you're talking to your sister or your best friend and you're consuming news from them, rather than somebody saying a bunch of very how do I say it? Like, it's a production. So it's not like very it's not conversational. And I think that's the fault of
It can be
TV.
a bit authoritarian. Like I feel like the legacy of some of the great news anchors of past days looms very heavy still over especially broadcast news.
Yeah, and a lot of the companies will just take that and then repurpose it on social media. And it's like, that's not really how you engage or reach an audience. But I think it's a formula that they're just so accustomed to. And it's like, how do we actually transition into being content creators as well as journalists?
Well, that's an interesting thing. Like, what is something that legacy media what are the things they could be doing to connecting more with different generations? Because you don't want to necessarily lose the entire generations who've been following you for this whole time, but you also want to be you want to expand your audience too. What is it that they can be doing that they're not doing right now? That you think?
Yeah, I think utilizing talents, like literally having content creators on your social media team that serve as quote unquote talent. I think Kay Agram at NBC4 does a really good job at this because she's literally like a content creator and she creates content for NBC4 as if she was like me going out to an experience a restaurant or going out to an experience or shooting news for the day. So it's not really reported in an official way, but it still meets those standards of integrity, but it's more relatable. So I think and mind you, that's pricey. I mean, New York is the number one market. So it's difficult to find people to do that on a full-time salary, which is needed. But I definitely think that newsroom should adopt that.
Okay. So basically what I'm hearing is like maybe we let the Walter Cronkite vibes go.
Yes, please.
All right. Well, turning to the work that you do, I mean, I was following you all through the fall. Actually, I think I discovered you in the summer and then followed you all through the fall. And that was because the content that you were doing around the election, I thought was so important. And you weren't just covering the horse race like so many networks and other news organizations have been accused of doing. You were breaking down government, what it is, who's in it, and how it works. And I'm wondering why you thought that was an important piece to include in your reporting about the 2024 election.
Yeah, I think that news stations just assume that people understand the history and background of the reports that they're detailing. And I understand that they have blocks, everything is on a time constraint, but it's so easy to assume, and we have to stop doing that. So I think it was important for me to break down things like what's a bill? How does a bill become law? What are the three branches of government? Because people don't understand how legislation actually works. And all they're hearing on the news is somebody passed this, somebody wrote this bill, and that's being amplified. But the process of how that can actually impact you, the time it takes to pass within two other branches, that is not talked about along with the breaking news. So I just thought it was my due diligence to kind of make that more digestible for people so that when they do consume traditional news, it's like, oh, I have background on this and I know what they're talking about. And now I can apply it because I have the full picture.
That's so interesting because one of the things that I was noticing from the man on the street interviews was that you were getting a lot of people who were basically asking questions that your videos would have answered simply because, that information wasn't as well understood as perhaps a lot of organizations were assuming.
Yeah, and I think that that was kind of frustrating watching that type of content during the election. It's like you're talking, I feel like you're just baiting people to talk about a refund check from Trump or refund check, refund check from Trump, or just different policies that they have no clue about. They just hear spewed on social media. And, that is so unhelpful. Like it helps with views, but it doesn't help with actually educating people on the impacts of the election. And I mean, I don't like to blame people because again, we see the state of media now and everybody needs views, everybody needs people to go back to the site. We need ad revenue in order for layoffs not to happen. But at the same time, we do have to do our due diligence, and that just wasn't happening.
It's like, I think that sometimes in legacy media and media in general, what might be interesting rather than letting people go if possible is trying to restructure how we tell the news in the sense of, not enough, when we talk about context, a lot of journalists don't always give that context to their stories. And it's almost like it would be great to have people who are working beats that help to put the bigger stories in a better context for their audience. I mean, I think often, as you were saying before, like, I think, everybody, whenever you're a younger generation, you don't put sometimes as much work into research. I mean, this is what we grow up into. We start realizing we've got to research more. We've got to figure this out more. How do you see Gen Z and younger even? How do you see them growing up in this field? How, like, because I don't know. Like for me, I'd be concerned that I feel like a lot of legacy media is kind of like, I don't know if they're giving up, and I'd be concerned of where they're getting their information from. So who do you trust then? Like as somebody growing into this, who do you end up trusting if it's not going to be part of the legacy media?
Yeah, I really hope legacy media does not give up. That would be probably the downfall of democracy. A very dramatic statement, but
No,
true.
it's not. No.
No sense. But Gen Z and I think it's Gen Alpha under,
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
they're really
Delightful honey badgers.
it's influencers that they're turning to. So I think the credibility of having a journalist behind, your title is really helpful on platforms like TikTok because they affiliate you being a journalist with you having background in the industry. So I can trust you because you say you're a journalist and you're posting clips while you're talking. I think the reporters at the Washington Post do a really good job at that, like establishing their
They
history,
do.
their beats, and their coverage, which makes you trust them as an influencer within the news and politics space. So I think that's where Gen Z is going to be turning to. But I'm also seeing, I feel like history repeats itself, right? So I'm also seeing people starting to buy print subscriptions again because they feel like it's growing, it's challenging them mentally because they grew up just having laptops and iPads shoved in their face from K through 12. So I do think history repeats itself and people will start turning to print, whether that's for the aesthetic or
Hmm.
or to actually read it and digest information, especially locally, since that's being pushed as well.
I mean, listen, we appreciate a good aesthetic over here. But I also wanted to, I'm wondering, because one of the other things that I appreciated so much about your work is that what you were doing on TikTok was your work. And I really want to underline that because there's been several people who have stepped into the news influencing space who are really just green screen themselves in front of another journalist's work, and they're really giving sort of like their opinion or maybe sometimes depending on who it is some analysis, but there's another reporter's work who they're actually jumping off of. And I guess I'm wondering like what your take is and why you made sure that your content was generated by you, was originally yours.
Yeah, I mean, I see those stitches as well. Those are a bit frustrating because I feel like people who don't have aren't media literate will
Mm-hmm.
take their opinions as fact. And that's where the downfall of education, information, and understanding comes from. So it's good to form an opinion, but I feel like the opinion should be factual and not stitches off of, some of the information. So that's frustrating. But the other part of other part of the question was what inspired me to do the research, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like one is because naturally I'm a journalist, so I feel like it's only right to do the research. Um, and two, I feel like going back to my original statement, like I just nobody's really breaking, I don't want to say nobody, but there aren't a lot of people that are really breaking it down to the T where it's laid out and it's digestible and you can understand the history and apply that history to what's going on today. Um, so yeah, I think that's what drove me, if that answers your question.
I think that does. I mean, what drove you, but again, also the fact that it's your work. Like at least I don't remember seeing any of your videos, and I've scrolled through your landing page, whatever it's called on TikTok several times. I'm not a stalker. But doing that though, I don't recall seeing you like using another journalist's work. It's your own stuff that you're doing for the platform. And I guess first of all, thank you. And second of all, that kind of set you apart from other news influencers. Because I've seen people who don't necessarily have a background in journalism but using like, I don't know, articles they got out of the Wall Street Journal or the Guardian or whatever, and they'll green screen themselves in front of it and then talk about it. And thus now they're news influencers because somebody else who's just scrolling past their page is like, oh, I didn't even know this article existed until you explained to me what it was.
Yeah, I think what's also helpful with me is that I'll use news sources from multiple outlets. So I'll have CBS, NBC, Fox, some local media, and then that's how I'll gather what's actually going on. Because sometimes there are discrepancies in, what they're saying. And I get it. People are on a time crunch. They have to turn stories around. So, but the average person is not going to sift through 5 to 6 articles to understand the basics of what's actually going on. So I like to do that and then give credit. Like I'll always add the screenshot and then have the journalist's name there just so that they're receiving credit too. Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. So, or I'll like highlight the text and then add that as a screenshot as an overlay to my videos. But yes, I think it's extremely important to give journalists their credit. And if not using your original stories, dissect multiple stories, not just from one outlet.
Yeah, that's so important. That's called researching. And I think that's the thing. Sometimes people go by one source and think that that covers everything. And all you're really doing sometimes is becoming a news reader, which is very different than being an actual journalist. And you're putting the research in to really give people kind of a layered look. It's like you're corroborating, what's being said, and that's what's important. I think like it would be so helpful for some people to have sort of like obviously there's nothing out there right now, but it's almost like knowing that there's some kind of like, hey, identifying. It's sort of like you were saying before about the Washington Post, like when you can identify somebody as an actual journalist, and I've put this in here, the work into this, the research and whatnot. That's different than somebody who just sits there and reads a news article from somebody else that they worked on.
Yeah.
But it's something I did want to ask about local news. You mentioned about how important you see local news. Can you talk a little bit about what local news means to you and why that's so important in terms of today's media landscape where it feels like everything is national and you have so much money being poured into like national, why local is important, why more should be invested in it?
Yeah, I mean, you feel the impact of your local government the most, the potholes that you're going over, the days the trash and recycling is being taken out, the budgets to different districts, all of that is felt on a local scale much more than you will feel the impact of national laws. Because what people forget is that the president is the president of the United States, not just you. So if they're signing something into law like a minimum wage law, if you're making 6 figures, that's not going to really affect you. But if your governor is trying to provide a budget for like an annual parade, just making something, coming up with something out of thin air. I mean, that affects parking that day. If they're trying to, put in a new light or roadway system, that affects your commute to work. So those things are much more important than a lot of the legislation that's passed on a national scale. So that's why I think local media is so, so, so important because they're informing you on those things that impact your livelihood, you know?
No,
Yeah.
I think that's so true. And that was always one of my like big things that I would tell people is a lot of the issues that you're talking about are actual local issues. This is where you vote down ballot and show up for local elections. But I'll get off my soapbox. Before we let you go, we end every interview by asking what drew you to this field of journalism? Like, I mean, you expressed that it sounds like you grew up in a house where, like news consumption and understanding the world around you, your local community was definitely valued and important. But to choose journalism as a career, I'm still trying to figure out if it's a personality flaw or what the deal is. But what made you want to do this?
Well, One, I did pray long and hard about, what my career should be, and I definitely heard journalism. So that's what I ended up doing. Um, but I really enjoy making news and information digestible. And again, I don't know if that's a character flaw because I want to seem like I'm smarter than everyone, but I really do enjoy breaking down topics so that if you're in the barbershop, if you're at the corner store, if you're on the train, you can be able to have a conversation about these things because you understand them on the smallest of scales. So that's why I love journalism, and that's why I chose to be a journalist.
Well, I love that. The Society of Deeply Committed and Passionate Flawed Individuals is very, very, very glad to see the work that you've been doing. So, Shelby, thank you so much for taking time to join us. This has been illuminating, to say the least. And I think that you are part of my opinion, is the next generation of what the news that we're consuming is going to look like. So I'm sure we'll see a lot more of you on our little rectangle screens.
Thank you. Though I'm not in news completely anymore, I am, there in spirit and as a freelancer.
Listen, I'm also doing my freelance hustle,
Yeah.
and once you have to be completely out, but I can hear from the way that you talk about it and you still have the passion. I don't know if you're out. You might be on a pause or a break, but not out.
Okay, not out.
Pause.
Yes,
Let's just
pause.
Got it. Well,
Thanks,
thank
Shelby.
you again. I really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure.
All right, bye-bye.
See ya.
Before we go, we wanted to let you know that we're going to be going dark with our full episodes, at least for the summer, while we work on some background stuff for the podcast and prep to come back after Labor Day.
But in the meantime, we'll still pop up from time to time on this feed and social media to talk about all things journalism and media and updates on what we've accomplished. Thanks for all your support and for following us.
Laid Off and Looking is an independent podcast conceived of and created by Jenna Flanagan and Dominic Camia.
Music provided by Jake Howitt. Research by Laura Rothenbucker.
You can watch and follow us on YouTube.
Or you can listen and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you have any questions or suggestions, we want to hear from you. So leave a comment.
We do check them.
Or reach out to us anytime at laidofandlookingpod@gmail.com.
New episodes every Friday.